Monday, July 11th, 2016, and the time is 7 p.m. This is the first school board meeting for our new superintendent, Dr. Matt Hillman. And this meeting, for those of you watching from home, is being held in the high school auditorium due to some work being done in the media center. Dr. Hillman, there are a number of items in the table file.
Yes, in the table file you're going to see some additional personnel items, new contracts, changes and additions. You'll also notice that we have a sketch of the proposed middle school driveway change order. We also have an article from the Minnesota School Boards Association about the long-term facilities maintenance planning process.
Okay, thank you very much. So if there's no objection, we'll add these items to the agenda as we move forward. We now have an opportunity for public comment. This is a chance for anyone residing in the Northfield Public School District to address the board. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we will move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet minutes from the regular school board meeting held on Monday, June 13th, 2016. Is there a motion to approve these minutes? Moved by Jeff. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Rob. Any question or discussion? Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the regular school board meeting held on Monday, June 13th, 2016, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to announcements and recognitions. Dr. Hillman.
We just have one announcement tonight. There is a chance of severe weather in the area this evening, so just so for everyone understands that if the sirens were to go off, our exit strategy is for the people on stage facing the camera. We are going down the stairs and to the left and up the hallway, just a little bit, out that exit door and up the hallway. For those of you sitting behind the podium, exit to your right through that same door and just head up. It's just a watch, but we'd rather be safe than sorry. So that's our only announcement for this evening.
Unless there's other announcements?
Do we need to adjourn the meeting?
We would actually recess, and the board chair could recess the meeting should it be.
Gotta be legal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and if you think about it, the city council had an issue with this, I believe, a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
So just better to know ahead of time.
I move we don't get hurt.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so board members, any other announcements or recognitions? No? Okay. So we will move on then to items for discussion and report. Our first item for discussion is registration and scheduling process at Northfield Middle School and Northfield High School. Here this evening is high school principal Joel Lear and middle school principal Greg Gelano. As a reminder, there was a PowerPoint in your packets.
Well, good evening, everyone. This question of, this was Greg's title, Secondary Scheduling 101, and there's an element to it that is sometimes it's almost hard to get to a point where it's on a level where it feels like it's a 101 introductory course, because each individual component of it is fairly simple, but it's when all of the pieces are kind of compounded together that you end up with some of the things that Greg and I wanted to share with you tonight, just to give at least a little overview of kind of what that process looks like on a yearly basis. So one of the weirdest aspects, but it's actually kind of a grounding mechanism for us as administrators, is that we barely get through the first semester of the previous year and start talking about and planning for the next year. In fact, at the high school, we have a little bit more variability in course offerings each year. So we end up with a conversation at the department chair table regarding potential new courses as early as October and November. Simply because those courses need to be discussed, flushed out, approved, and then really described in a way that allows us to move them toward the registration process that begins in February and March. So the registration process, like I said, begins shortly after the first semester is done, and it's really the first step. When we talk about registration for the high school, and Greg and I will kind of volley back and forth here with middle school, high school. But at the high school, we really have a student-driven schedule, as you know, and that's obviously within reason, confines of systems and realities that we have in place regarding staffing allocations and so on, and facility limitations. But many of you may have gone to a college experience where you went in to register, and if classes were closed, you had to choose a different class. This is kind of the reverse of that, where that's the schedule that's set by the institution. Our schedule is really designed by the student interest. So we have a menu of classes across the disciplines, and then students enroll in them, or excuse me, register for them. And based on those numbers of registrants, we then formulate a model of staffing across the department. So, and there's a significant level of variability at times. A couple of examples I'd just like to play out for you, though, in terms of what that variability looks like. 6 years ago, we had a .7 family and consumer science teacher. Family and consumer science is a complete elective, so that means there are no requirements required by the state or local institution for graduation. So 0.7 6 years ago, and this fall we'll start with a 1.9 FTE in our family and consumer science department. A big part of that is sugar, butter, and flour. A baking and pastries class that was really the brainchild of Sherry Carlsrud, one of our FACS teachers, really exploded and has been consistently a 6 or 7 section offering since its implementation 4 years ago. We have an advanced baking and pastries class, but there are just classes that are developing within that department that have made it expand. Other places we have an ebb and flow. AP Psychology, for example, is a class we've offered 3 years. We've had anywhere between 1 and 4 sections, and this fall we will have 2. So where some of them kind of level off, and we can kind of anticipate what those classes look like each year. Others, there's a significant variability, and that variability, again, is kind of created by the student body and where their interests lie. Why don't I let you speak?
Yeah. Thanks, Joel. Good evening, and one of the things, like Joel said, we'll kind of tag team this, but a difference with registration at middle school versus high school is, unlike the high school where it is driven by the students in registration, we don't have that ability at the middle school. So we do have kind of a set number of electives that we do have, and there's a little flexibility within that, but where that becomes a little bit problematic is, as an example, where Joel was able to maybe shift some things to cover the facts. What happens with us at the middle school is I may get 100 extra students signed up for maybe CTE or for facts, and I don't have the staffing to cover it. So that means students can't take that elective. So we just have to, the computer generates it, it's random, they just have to take another elective. It works, but it's not the best system, and it's not necessarily user-friendly, but our families and students are very understanding of that as well. Oops, let's go the right way. Leading into that is then we also get, at the end of March, beginning of April, we get a set amount of FTE from the district. And there's some components to that Joel and I get to face every year. One is enrollment. Enrollment is not something that's set in stone. It kind of fluctuates. And when we get the FTE allotment end of March or beginning of April, our enrollment can change quite a bit by the time the start of the year. At the middle school, one of the kind of tricky pieces that we have has to do actually with St. Dominic's. Because St. Dominic's counts when you get a FTE report, an enrollment report, their students count as half-time. But there's not half students in science, and there's not half students in some of the electives. They're full students. So it's a little bit deceiving on our total numbers, and it does affect the schedule. It's not a large number of students, but a change of 15, 20 students does make a big difference in the schedule. Some other things that we started MTSS, both at the high school and middle school. We've been very fortunate to have ADSIS funds to be able to cover most of that, but we still need to use some of our building funds as well. And as that grows, then you're looking into the future. Like, for example, for MTSS, we found kind of we'll call it a flaw, but a little bit of a snag in our system with reading, where if students, and math for that matter, as soon as they qualify for special education, they have to drop their MTSS class, even though they've been highly successful in it. It's just a requirement that was there. So again, decisions then need to be made. With the FTE that we have is how do we cover those, still supporting those students, and where do I take it from?
The one piece I would add about the in terms of once we have that staffing piece and look at the enrollment numbers from students, it is a student-driven schedule. One of my first priorities is staff maintenance. In other words, maintaining the staff that we have. So I realize that each year we come to you with potential recommendations for reductions across certain departments. That is after a number of steps that have gotten us far past the notion of how do we move forward with the same staff that we have. Because it's not really in our best interest to say, you know, Jeff, you're a social studies teacher, this year you're going to be a 0.7, next year a 0.9, the next year a 0.6, then you're going to be full-time and moving back and forth. There are some logistical pieces that don't make that possible, and that's a bit maybe a exaggerated example. But student, you know, making sure that we fulfill as many student requests as we can in terms of that student enrollment piece, maintaining staff when we can, and there are obviously extremes where we have to make some tough decisions, and obviously you've been a part of some of those types of decisions in years past. And so it certainly comes into play in that conversation. I think that Greg has kind of illustrated a little bit of a difference in nuance between the two buildings, where I think that his staff, he looks at the staff model and says, okay, how do we fit the student request best into that staffing model? At the high school, it really is the student registration that drives it more strongly. And a key component of that, and it's interesting because we inherit the students that Greg has. At the middle school, the students understand, the parents understand that that's how that system works. It's very quick transition for the students when they get to the high school to say, well, what do you mean I can't have all 7 of the classes that I asked for because I asked for them? And so they adapt very, you know, and that's a great statement about this community and about this school system, that we have that many choices and that many opportunities, and that the students drive that. But I had mentioned on one of the previous slides, and we won't go back to it, but one of those types of nuances is when we have that type of large number of choices. We have 7 periods in a day. We have 72 classes that are offered a single time. So that means every hour of the day, 10 classes function only at that time of day. And so that student who picks 7 classes, and 2 of them are singletons, and they both happen second hour, now they have to make a choice. And so there are nuances along the way that reduce the number of options students have, but from the get-go, the schedule is built in a way to maximize those options. And really the distribution of staffing and the distribution of students in terms of the actual schedule building process is really designed to maximize the yeses to those questions where the student says, can I take this? And we want to maximize that whenever possible. So the master schedule, and I'm going to speak, and this is probably a point where Greg and I diverge most significantly in terms of how this process plays out for us each spring. But the software that we use to build the master schedule does a lot of the work for us, but it doesn't have that human element to it. In fact, there are some times when, you know, this time of year, June and July, and I'm just kind of pulling my hair out thinking, why can a computer not figure that out? But I can in a matter of, you know, a couple of minutes as we look at individual schedules. But so the schedule is automated, but it's not automatic. So in the case of the high school, we start with last year's schedule. So when Chris Nessett moves everything forward, and then we start doing what's called the pseudo run, in other words, the fake scheduler, I start with the assumption that the students are predictably like the students the year before. So all the students are moving up a year, but we start with the exact same schedule. So psychology at the same time, early American history is at the same time, all of the classes are at the same time. Obviously there are nuances that change, so if there are 4 offerings or 4 sections of one class one year, 3 the next, we remove 1, but 3 of those are happening at the same time. So then we do a pseudo schedule run, which means the computer fakes loading all the kids into classes based on their registration. And so then that process then begins our opportunity to kind of cut and paste, move classes around, the chess game, if you will, to get that number of placements to the maximum number. So some of the things that we need to load manually include special education, in some cases special education students in whole. So it might be a student who has a specialized schedule that we literally don't have that student register, and then we build that schedule by hand. And then also, depending on where EAs are placed, can determine where classes are placed during the course of the day. Number of students per class determines the number of sections and the placement of them. And then, like I mentioned, special education courses. So special education students sometimes have individually created schedules, but then special education teachers also teach courses for special ed students who are also in mainstream courses. So there are 2 elements to that special education program that is a little bit of a chess game as we balance that out. And then we look at, like I said, we mentioned request. And then the intervention systems, MTSS, for example, Read 180, any of the intervention program standards classes for students who need an additional layer of support, the ninth grade academy, all of those programs have some parameters that are restrictive. The academy, for example, would be one of the biggest ones where it needs to be 4 classes in a row, can't be first hour, can't be 6th and 7th hour, can't conflict with band and all these other pieces. So those are the types of intervention pieces that are in play. I love biology. We have 10 sections of biology. We have more than 1 section per hour. We can put a kid in biology wherever they go. If they have MTSS college reading, that's 1 hour, and that is likely going to conflict with something else that they have registered for. So those are pieces to consider as well. Then the last bullet, and then I'll let Greg pop back up here again. Greg and I share a number of staff members. I also share staff with the ALC, and then also we just have part-time staff members who have particular restrictions on what time of day those classes can happen. So there are a number of pieces then that get plugged in. So the computer does, and if those of you that can understand or appreciate a golf metaphor, you hit the drive and you take care of 90% of that hole with that first shot. And if you golf like me, it takes like 10 more shots to get that last 15, 20 yards of the ball from the chipping area into the hole. And that's really kind of what that master schedule looks like. The computer does a lot, and then there are all these little pieces that you have to add in to get to the point where we have a complete schedule.
Okay. No, Joel did a nice job. The only thing I would add is the other piece that I know I work on as well is with supervision and study hall. So as I'm looking at where classes are placed, I have to make sure that I have staff members, typically 2 every hour, that have a supervision to cover study halls along the way. So I can move classes slightly, but I have to be careful not to cause myself another problem when it comes to supervision as well. Did it twice. I think right. Choices, Joel alluded to the choices that are both the middle school and high school. As you can see, the high school has considerably more electives than the middle school. The middle school are every other day all year, which the every other day is great for choice. It gives students more of an opportunity to take classes, but it also complicates things. If you think mathematically, it just creates more combinations of classes when you do every other day. And you always have to have something opposite. If something's on a maroon day, you can't have a blank on a gold day, so you have to make sure that there's another elective that's every other day opposite that. So it does complicate things, but for our students, for our families, the every other day system does work. You can see a list of some of the, obviously Joel was going to list all 60 of them, but you can see the 13 electives that we have at the middle school, and then the class size debate at the bottom. That's, Joel again also alluded to that a little bit, and we had that discussion at the middle school as well, but not as in length as Joel would have. Is okay, where's that tipping point? At what number is this class not being responsible with your FTE because it can be used somewhere else to support students and more students in another area, and that's something that that discussion goes on a regular basis.
And in terms of that FTE, the tipping point in terms of another section, we're working on both ends of it. So what size is too small, but what size is too large? And obviously, if you think about a science lab where we're not playing with mercury anymore, but we're playing with some things that are still equally, well, not equally dangerous, but close to, it's flames and gas and those types of things. So how do you then interplay, the need of a lab to be controlled versus maybe what we used to call a lecture course, a class where kids aren't up and around at lab tables and so on, working with chemicals, and how do they differ in terms of the numbers that they can tolerate? It's also tricky in the sense that you have to mind the notion of how does limiting courses then essentially kind of lock us into courses that then are limited for years to come. So in the art department, maybe it's a fledgling class that really just needs to get off the ground so people can see what it looks like, and then might draw additional attention in years to come. So does that mean then you offer it to 15, to 16? Or do you hold fast? New Prague, I remember a number of years ago visiting with Tom Doig, the principal there, they for a while had a cut that said anything under 24 wasn't offered. And if you've looked at our registration, or looked at our enrollment guide, that would lop off literally some departments. And I don't mean classes, I mean classes certainly, but some departments would find themselves, rendered next to flatlining. So, and I think that's one of it's the plus and minus all in one of Northfield, is that I think that Northfield has always been committed to that number of choices, the comprehensive high school, which we celebrate on a daily basis, but it also brings with it some difficult decisions and some limitations and some other pieces that we have to live with as a result of those choices always being available. So I talked a little bit about the pseudo run and jumped ahead a couple of slides, but the computer is very kind in that it allows you to run the schedule without running the schedule, because that's really when, if you've taken a tour of my office, you see there, in Greg's too, there are big magnetic boards with all of the classes on magnets, and we just cross our fingers that no one rubs against it during schedule building time. But all of those magnets then represent one of the courses, and that's kind of the visual that we use to say, okay, how is it that, so when we run the first pseudo schedule, I'm usually shooting for about 96% compatibility, which means that 96% of the selections students made. So 1,300 students times 7 equals 11,000 choices, and of those 11,000 choices, we're shooting for 95, 96% of them to be filled by the computer itself. I would say roughly 90%. Now we've gotten to a point where we build a schedule that kind of knows what the computer is going to do to a certain extent, and that is part of the reason why we use last year's schedule to start this year's scheduling process. So we usually land kind of in the 85, 86% on that very first run, and then the task that we have manually is then we start moving magnets, and we say, okay, so nobody's loading into Art 1 6th hour second semester. Something's conflicting with that. And so then we look at all the 6th hour classes and we say, well, let's try it the 4th hour. And so you make those types of kind of chess moves throughout the course of those weeks where we're trying to get that increased 10% up. And sometimes we get really lucky, and other times Greg we were talking this afternoon, where it just gets to a point where you're kind of staring at the board going, well, I don't know what the issues are anymore. But it's funny, I remember about 7-8 years ago, Rebecca Messer, I almost said physics teacher came into the office when I was starting to do the pseudo run, and she said, whatever you do, don't put band and physics together. And I said, what? Band and physics. All the physics kids are in the band. And every year since then, I bet 80% of the students who are in physics are also in band. So you never put physics and band together. So there are those types of nuances that you just kind of learn over time. Some of them make perfect sense. Some of them don't make any sense. And you just kind of keep them in a notebook and you say, okay, make sure I don't put those two together and keep those two apart, or keep those two together. The last piece, and I would have sworn I had this on a slide somewhere, but the other piece also to keep in mind in that process is space. So for example, in the science department, we have certain rooms that are biology labs, certain rooms that are chemistry labs, and the key component there is natural gas is available in the chemistry labs. And so we have a limit to the number of labs that we have for any given discipline. So we have a limit to the number of sections that can be offered at any given time. And we did some room rearrangement to give us 4 chemistry labs, where we used to have a biology course meeting in one of the chemistry labs. So we always had to be very careful we had 4 chemistry teachers, but we could only be offering 3 chemistry sections at a time. We have a similar nuance in family and consumer science this year because we have 1 foods lab, but we have 2 teachers teaching 14 sections of FACS classes that need the foods lab. And so those types of nuances, one of the last things we do before we lock the schedule is to make sure that we actually have the physical space to accommodate those types of classes at those particular given times. I think I paraphrased most of those things.
And then we get to kind of when the schedule gets locked, which is the end of July. And Chris Nessa I joke with her, she does her little magic, and all the students that were this past year 6th graders become 7th grade, and so forth up the line. Once that happens, you no longer can do any mass changing. Everything is by individual student, and that becomes very time consuming. It's possible, we've had to do it. You just kind of all hands on deck and you get it done if you all of a sudden see a really serious conflict you didn't see coming. But the work's not done then, because what we do, I know at the middle school, is both Jenny and Corey and myself and Michael Keefe, we come in and then we literally go through every student's schedule, and we make sure, because the computer's not perfect. It'll give you 2 Maroon Day classes, or you'll have a study hall, or 2 classes on Maroon Days, so you have 2 study halls one day and none the other day. So you do those little things that you try making as perfect as possible, so that when students do get their schedule and they go live, just one less thing that the students have to worry about with their schedule coming in. And then there's a separate scheduler for study halls, which basically just fills in blanks in the student's schedule at the study hall, and then again doing staff supervision just to double check. And as Joel mentioned, you also have to make sure room assignments are set and there's no doubling up there as well.
Yeah, we do something similar at the high school. The one piece, probably the biggest component of our summer, once we lock the schedule in, like Greg said, it's a very sweaty finger when you hit the button that locks it in, because everything is so simple prior to that, but then it's literally one kid at a time from that point forward. So we had a situation last week where Lori and I have been spent the better part of about 4 days taking a baking class, because I had inadvertently scheduled 2 classes for the same teacher at the same time. Had to move it to a different hour because it was in conflict with another class that needed the foods lab. So literally had to take all 34 of those kids and move them to a different point in the day. So that requires some shuffling in other classes just to make sure that all of the classes balance. So the last component that takes most of the summertime work is the computer. If you look at our health classes, for example, Health 10 is a requirement for all 10th graders. So 330 kids schedule in there. And the computer doesn't care that 4th hour you have 36 kids and 5th hour you have 28, because you told it the max is 36, so it filled it to 36, and there are 28 in the other class. Humans care, and so we spend a lot of time taking a look at those 11 sections of health and saying, okay, how close can we get those to being exactly the same? And there are nuances that are a little bit weird. We've had years in the past where we've had 2 AP Calc sections. One has 29 and one has 13. We have enough kids for 2 full sections, or 39 and whatever. But there's a 20 student difference, but it's because all of those students in this one are in the concert choir, or all of the students in this one are in this singleton, or AP government, or AP econ. And those are pieces that we just gonna have to deal with, and we're just very transparent with our staff to say that if there's an imbalance, we've tried to fix it. Because if there are ways to fix it, we'll go to the ends of the earth to make sure those health classes are 32s. But if you have a 16 student disparity, it's because we've tried, and it's just not mathematically possible to get those kids in there in a balanced way. All right, schedules go live at the end of August. Pleasing over, that sounds just really impossible. Pleasing over 2,000 students and their families isn't possible. We do the best we can, and I think that most of the time we see a lot of satisfaction with families and parents, and simply because I think that we have school. I remember when we toured way back when we started our 9th grade academy, we toured St. Louis Park because they had a real great model of a 9th grade program for we have a 9th grade academy for a certain group of kids. They had a 9th grade academy for the entire 9th grade class. But I remember visiting with their principal, who locked in at 78% compatibility, which is just, in my mind, is this monstrous number. And so you have exponentially that many more students who are having to make alternative choices. Our system is set up in a way that it gives us enough flexibility. We have a lot of choices, and there are some tough choices, but we've learned enough about the schedule where we can get it compatible, where about 4.5–5% of requests are either necessarily have to be kind of fixed, or there has to be an alternative. And so students do choose alternative classes that they're willing to live with if the initial classes aren't ones they're willing to go with. It's my favorite slide. Took a lot of work.
Okay, thank you.
This was my contribution to the PowerPoint.
So board members, are there questions or comments? Rob?
I just have a question about the overall pool of FTE for the whole district, how that decision is made. Is there a secondary pool and an elementary pool? Is some of this enormous amount of choice at the secondary level coming at the expense of larger classes in the elementary, because as FTE is going over here when it could have been used to create more elementary school teachers?
You know, Rob, we have, we do two things separately. We handle the elementary school, we have a formula that I don't have with me right now, but it's based on the younger the student, the lower number of students that we're shooting for each section. So we will take the total number of students, we'll subtract out the compañeros students because they get one section in grades 1 through 5, and then we run a calculation, and that calculation gives us the number of sections that run at each building. Now, at the elementary schools, we have for a long time been very solid as a 4-section building, including the compañeros piece. We have had a couple of classes at Greenvale Park over the past couple of years. One grade level that I think is actually moving on to 6th grade this year that was small enough where they were still in the low to mid 20s, but only ended up with a total of 3 sections, including compañeros. So we do a separate calculation for the elementary. And then, of course, several years ago when we made the specialists full-time at the elementaries, that's an already set kind of piece. So the secondary has actually, because again, the enrollment has not significantly changed over the year with the exception of this coming year's sophomore class, Joel and Greg have had a very similar number of FTE for quite some time. I think that's fair to say. And then if you remember, we also have something that the board adopted quite some time ago called contingency FTE. So we have room for up to 3 additional FTE district-wide each year that we can use to troubleshoot specific class size issues. When we were sunsetting the legacy compañero strategy, the elementaries, Bridgewater and Greenville Park, each got a full FTE each year to help them get through that bubble until that legacy strategy exited. That group actually then ended up with our middle school, and so for 3 years, Greg had a significant portion of that contingency FTE to help with that one class that's about 60 students bigger than any other class that we have, so it's a real anomaly. Joel has been the beneficiary of those contingency pieces this year. It's much easier for us to use contingency in small surgical strikes at the secondary because Joel might say, boy, I really need an extra section of chemistry. That only requires 0.2 of an FTE as opposed to a full FTE like it might at the elementary school. So we have one calculation that we do at the elementary school to focus on class size, and then the secondary has a larger number of FTE that they use based upon most of the time the student registrations.
Just a couple pieces I would add too, and I would just reiterate, I think Greg and I salivate for different reasons than the elementary principals do, because if we're having a conversation about staffing and it's a 10th or 2, I'm like, oh, that's huge. And I can go back and make some really significant changes to a schedule with a 10th or 2 tenths. Elementary elementary principals are dealing with, halves and wholes for the most part. And there are exceptions to that. But it's truly a different cat. And the interesting thing is, so I'm starting my 11th year. I don't know of a conversation where we've talked about the notion of how one affects the other in terms of elementary budgeting versus secondary. It's always been kind of seen as a whole. And I think that there were a few years ago when elementary principals were scratching their heads a little bit as numbers went to 26 and 27 across the section and said, well, wow, what do we do? And we used some contingency funds for that purpose as well. But I think we've just always seen that, I see my role as trying to do as much with a limited amount of staffing as I possibly can. I know that Jeff before Greg and Greg as well now, it's a little bit of bait and switch and a little bit of the ball under the cup trick to really maximize that. And the other piece to that too is that our staff, I'm going to speak for my staff and Greg can speak for his, my staff has bought into the notion of what we do as an institution. So we may have a teacher who says, you know what, I can handle 38 kids in class X, but we need to get those chemistry 9 classes down. And so departments will advocate within their departments for a spread that makes sense to them. And so really I have, this makes it sound like 2 people are building these schedules, but that staffing model is created really in my building by 75 people, all of whom have a real integral involvement in that conversation when they get the staffing model and say, okay, what do you want to do with this? Here's your staffing allocation. Sometimes there are great creative ideas that I would have never come up with had they not been brought forth by the teachers who were examining it and really doing the same thing we are, but just on a lower altitude level at the department level as opposed to the full building.
Other questions? No.
Joel, are the number of students requesting a particular course pretty much consistent from year to year, or is there large swings? in
There
the
are large
request?
swings, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. There are large swings in certain areas. I would say by and large, if I said, if I had to give you one answer or the other, I would say that they're fairly predictable. But we usually have, I'm in the middle of a stats course. But if you think of the bell curve, those outliers, there are always going to be, 10 to 12 outliers that are kind of, wow. I mean, I would never have predicted, and this probably makes me dumb, but never would have predicted baking and pastries would move 12% of our student body through it every single year. She thought this was kind of a cool idea to add to the curriculum of family and consumer science, and it was just like, boom, 180 kids, and it's been that way ever since. In other places, there's that kind of predictability of, we look at AP Psychology, for example, when it was kind of new and fresh, and it was an additional elective for students who wanted to pursue psychology. We kind of shot up to 4, and like I said, we're dropping down to 2, and people have wondered, well, is that one of these, or is it kind of leveling off? We typically offer the standard size AP Econ course, AP Government class, typically the same number of sections of Phi-Ed electives and those types of things. So there is some predictability to it, more predictability than not, but there certainly are those outliers that have me kind of gasping at times.
Very informative presentation.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Are there ever times when, that despite student interest, maybe student interest is very high for a certain subject, where you might go, that subject matter or pursuing that is just not a responsible use of our FTE right now, that doesn't really belong in a high school curriculum or something like that? I mean, what's the parameters deciding, yes, we will offer that class?
Well, that process is really taken care of before it gets to the student. So the fact that the students are having a chance to register for it means that the staff, prior to that, specifically the vehicle through the department chairs, have rendered, if it's a new class, have rendered it, worthy of adding to the list.
Okay.
And we have a pretty rich conversation at that table because it's a great balancing act of teachers who support one another, but teachers who also recognize territory. And I say that not in a bad way at all. But if I am an elective teacher and I hear that there's a new elective in social studies, so I'm a true elective, I'm family and consumer science, and I hear they're going to offer, or they want to offer a new elective in social studies where they've already got 3.5 required years of social studies, my radar is going to go up and I'm going to want to find out a lot about that. We very rarely have a class proposal that's shot down in a way. I'm ultimately the one who approves or doesn't approve them, but it's a very rich conversation at that level. And I think most of that conversation answers the question that you brought up here,
Okay.
so that once it gets to the students, we've kind of vetted it for those types of pieces,
Okay.
and then have kind of rendered it.
So it's based on student enrollment, but not entirely.
Right, and there are limitations to it. So we offer advanced health, for example, each year, and I think this year will be the first year we've offered it as an actual class. So they've been able to register for it, but we have enough enrollment to carry it. If we had 300 kids sign up for advanced health, we wouldn't be able to serve them all, simply because our Phi-Ed offerings and our health offerings occupy our health Phi-Ed teachers' licensure. So we literally would have to go out and hire somebody new to cover that licensure because we don't have someone internally. So there are some limitations in that regard. Sometimes there are situations where that says, oh, that department's growing, we need to expand it. But those types of situations would be where it becomes tricky to say, if we have 1 year where 300 kids want advanced health, and the last 4 years we've barely had enough for one, that's probably not a situation where we go out and hire a new teacher.
Okay.
Whereas in family and consumer science, over the last 6 years, it's been boom, 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 building like that, so that it becomes more predictable growth, as Noel talked about, than it is this ebb and flow.
The difference with the middle school is that it's more about choice. And so students, and I've seen over my time at the middle school where there's been less and less with parents and students. They pre-register for electives, but it really doesn't matter if they get in or not. At some point in their time during 7th and 8th grade, they will get into a class. They'll get into a CTE class, or they'll get into an art class. And we kind of recognize that as we're scheduling. If they can't get their first choice, we may, a 7th grader, we may say, you know what, they got one more year, they'll get into it next year type of thing. I should also point out that at the middle school, 6th grade is really kind of closer to an elementary model because they have very few elective choices. They really only have one period where they can take their music, their band, orchestra, choir, and they can take Spanish. But other than that, their day is pretty scripted. So like the increased FTE, that bubble class that came through, there wasn't a lot you were going to do other than the fact you pump up your staff and you say, it's 1 year. Because you're not going to be able to hire enough FTE to be able to cover that. And the staff, just like Joel's, they're on board. They're good about it. Our math department's similar to some of Joel's with their low-level math classes. They say, you know, we'll take a low number there and increase our upper-level ones to cover, to kind of just be responsible. It's just better for students.
Other questions? Rob?
In my least successful teaching experience, I was teaching in a middle school where I was in 4 different rooms during the day, including having Latin students sitting at sewing machines in a fax room because they didn't have enough classrooms for me as an elective subject teacher. So I'm wondering how the assigning classrooms, how that works out, and whether you end up finding whether teachers have to move around a lot, or whether they get to pretty much stay in the same room all day, or?
At the middle school, pretty much 98% of the staff that are full-time leave to stay in the classroom. We've been very fortunate enough that it's worked out. Part-time staff that come from the high school or just general part-time staff, typically I try not having them move every hour. Obviously, that's best case scenario. However, that being said, Pete Moss, who covered a 6/10 3-class position, he did have to move every hour. But part of that was keeping him in a math room as much as possible, where he had a smart board and some other things at his disposal to teach with. But for the most part, most teachers do not need to move. This year may be a little bit different with increased EL population, increased EL staffing. We weren't designed for 2 full-time or close to full-time EL teachers, so I joke with our staff, I get to work a little magic to see if I can make that work.
Yeah, I'm just running down the list. The only situations where we have teachers who maybe are in multiple classrooms would be, I mentioned the fax lab, for example. We just don't have the fax or the food lab space to keep, if we had 2 labs, that'd solve that problem. But so Karen and Sherry will share that lab and another classroom. But so their locations are 2, so they're just switching back and forth. I think for the most part, other than, as Greg mentioned, some part-time staff that share a room, so one staff is there in the morning, one in the afternoon. We eliminated our math teacher that was moving from room to room 4 times. We actually dissolved a computer lab, and now we have an additional classroom in the math wing, so that person will be stationary for that period. So I think I'm hitting everyone. And then there are those specialty situations, for example, in technology and engineering, where just the nature of the course that Mark is moving from the welding lab to the woods lab to the computer lab, that kind of thing. But that's more just by the design of the program itself. But we've, I think, pretty much eliminated the silly movement, I guess I would describe it in.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments? I had one comment and a question. I think, as a board level, we're usually at 30,000 feet, but I think to be able to get into the woods, there's some real value to being in the weeds and seeing what it's really like and the challenges. I had a question for Joel. The high school offering of 60 electives, do you know how that compares to a high school our size?
Well, high school our size, that's
Yeah.
high.
Okay.
And I'll be honest, I kept losing count as I was up on my board, so it's probably closer to 75, but I wanted to say 60 plus. We do have, and we've talked about language here. We're in the Minnesota Conference, we were the only conference school that offered 3 musics. We have 4 languages. Most schools our size have 2, in some cases 1. But we do have a wide array of opportunities for kids compared to schools our size. In fact, we've talked about, we've made comparisons at the budgetary level and per pupil funding level of schools much bigger. And that's really kind of where we land in terms of the opportunities that we provide for kids. So it's pretty cool.
And then the current software that we're using, is there new or different software out there that could make the process easier? Or are we really working with software that's really best suited?
It is a software program that we're used to.
Okay.
Well, I'm not starting in a really good place there, am I? Skyward is and I think that's, and I said that a little bit facetiously, but it's actually true that you get comfortable and used to the system that you've been playing in. This is the third student management system that I've worked with as an administrator. I think that there are, we talk with other administrators around the district, around the region. Infinite Campus, for one, is an example of one that people talk about as being very user-friendly. But I've really never had that. I've had that conversation much more from the student management, the kind of the daily student management process, and not so much from the master schedule process. So I would have to dig into that question a little more specifically to say, how do those different systems work with the master schedule building process, and is it a simple, straightforward process? We laugh. I think Greg and I have talked about this before, that our big magnet boards are replicated digitally on the screen, and I don't even know where that part of the program exists, because it just wouldn't serve me well to have it be this big. So I've got this monstrous thing from 1974 that serves me well. Although Marnie Thompson did remind me that when I first arrived, we were using poster board and 3M Post-it notes to move things around. So we've leapt to high-tech magnetry in that regard. But yeah, I'd have to go a little more specific with
No,
the
that's
question.
fine. I was just curious,
Well, and I think over the past 10 years, this is what we call a student information system.
Okay.
And the scheduler is the heart of any student information system, because it is what generates all of the other stuff. It generates the classes, it creates the attendance, it is the basis for the grade book. On the back side of the student information system, we also have our MARS reporting, which is critical because that's the reporting to the state. And there's a certification process for that. And there used to be a number of other companies that provided software like this. We're really down now to, I would say, for a school district our size, I would even argue, Joel, 2. TIES, which is a very large organization in Minnesota, actually recently canceled its very widely used student information system. A number of metro districts use it. There's a new company that a lot of those districts are now going to. They're either choosing Infant Campus, they're choosing Skyward that we have. Smaller school districts will use a product called JMC, which is actually literally a family-run business out of Lake City, Minnesota. Districts under 1,000 typically use that system, but it's a very limited market, and so you really just have a couple of choices. And I have worked with actually almost every single one of them in my career, and they all have their warts. They all have the things that you love, they all have the things that you don't love, and having known administrators who've done both, they'll say, yep, Skyward does this part really well, or Campus does this part really well, but boy, I wish it did this better, or I wish that this one was a little bit better. We are fortunate here because you heard the name Chris Nessett brought up several times. And Chris Nessett is nothing short of a Skyward guru. I mean, she will actually sometimes tell the support people what they need to do, because she has run the system for so many years, and she's such an incredible, helpful support during the scheduling process, because I know many times Joel or Greg will contact her when they're trying to walk through something, and she just knows the software so well that she's able to assist us. So we're really limited in the choices of what we have. They have their good parts, they have their not so good parts. And we have Chris Nessett, who really knows more about Skyward than I would venture to say a significant number of people who work there.
Yeah, we actually have an escort whenever she wants to walk across the street.
She's wrapped in bubble wrap.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's really interesting. Well, thank you. Not only for the presentation, but obviously for the work that you do. And I think one of the things that makes it so successful and so important is that it's student-driven, and student choice is really the primary goal. And I think that anytime students come first, it's a win. So thank you for all your work. And the weeks ahead, which are some of your most difficult. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So we will move on now to our second item for discussion and report, which is the strategic planning process review. Dr. Hillman.
So I just have a few sentences for you this evening about the strategic planning process. Basically, the purpose of a strategic plan is to provide a direction for the district, to make sure that we are having that true north in which we use to make our decisions, both at the board level and our principals and our other directors and our teachers on a daily basis. The strategic planning process for our district is overdue. The last time that we did this process was in 2004. We really have used that plan and that process very well, but I think that we have talked, and many of us have said that it's really time to start looking at that strategic planning process again, because the things that faced us in 2004 are different than what we face today. So what I have done is I've just started the conversation with Dr. Bruce Miles of Big River Group. Dr. Miles has facilitated something he calls the chainsaw strategic planning method in literally hundreds of school districts. And the process, what I really like about Dr. Miles' process is that he involves a number of stakeholder groups. So it would start off with the board and administration getting together, and what we'd like to do with that is using the August 8th board meeting. So just before that August 8th board meeting from 5 to 6:30, we'd like to have a work session, administrators and board members, and Dr. Miles will help us through that. He would also contact each of you before that day just to have an individual conversation with each of you. From there, then what we're looking at on September 1st, which is a workshop day, it would be a day where we're having a conference style professional development day where teachers have choices during the day. There's 5 different sessions. Teachers can select different sessions each hour. It's like a professional conference, and Dr. Miles would run 5 consecutive sessions where any staff member in the district could come and participate as part of the strategic planning process. There will be a community event, which we have not settled on the date yet, sometime in early September, and then we bring it to a close with a final board and administration meeting. Again, that part is yet to be set. But the key thing is I wanted to let you know that this is a piece we're getting started. The first date that we'd like to look at is at August 8th, just before the board meeting. Try not to have you come in on a different evening. And so what we would do is 90 minutes and then have a short break so that people can just take a minute to collect themselves before the actual board meeting begins on that evening. But what we're really excited about is the chance to come back and engage folks, board members, administrators, community, staff members. What is the direction, are the statements of direction that we would like to use on a daily basis? In fact, I've got my comfy blanket down here, my school board binder. I'm trying to do this all from my iPad here, but you all know that many of you bring the mission and beliefs to every board meeting. Carrie Nelson used to always have them right when she was making decisions, as many of you do. And really, I think it's a matter of saying that those have served us very well. Let's have another process that updates those for us so that we are really using the latest things that our community and that you expect of us. And we would plan to use that process and the results of it in a very serious way when we're facing some difficult decisions or making day-to-day decisions as well. So just wanted to provide you a brief update that we're looking at using Dr. Bruce Miles from the Big River Group, just a little bit of an overview of his process, and just to get that first date on your calendar. We'll do a doodle poll for that final piece just so we can try to align people's schedules. And so again, just a very brief preview. Are there any questions, or does that make sense to folks?
Board members, questions? Okay. Probably if everyone want to look at their personal schedule for the first proposed meeting of August 8th, and let myself or Danita know if that's going to be a problem for us to meet from 5 to 6:30 on Monday, August 8th. And then any other questions for Dr. Hillman regarding the process or moving forward? Okay, I think it's really exciting. As you said, I think our community, our demographics, and interest level for students in a variety of ways and needs and mandates from the state and federal. The feds have changed so much since 2004. I think it will be a really excellent process going forward.
Well, and if we're not careful, a school district is intended, we can end up being all things to all people, and that's really good. It's the same piece that Joel just talked about with the schedule, but there is some real benefit to having a little bit of a tighter focus in terms of what we are expected to do, because it will provide us that very specific outcome, those very specific goals that will allow us to say, okay, this is important. but that's not necessarily part of our strategic plan, and so we need to divert our resources here or focus on this instead. And from an administrative point of view, that is a very helpful piece for us to have for us to know exactly what that true north is that we are going after.
Excellent, that's really exciting, thank you. Okay, so we will move on then. District committee reports. This actually came as a result of board member Rob Hardy suggesting that as board members, and in your packet is, just for a refresher, the number of board committees and district committees that board members act as liaisons to. And so Rob Hardy had the suggestion that as part of a board meeting, or each board meeting, or bi-monthly, board members would have an opportunity to present just some brief overview of what their committees are working on, just as a way for board members to keep abreast of what's happening in the district. And again, it wouldn't be mandatory. It would be as assigned to a committee if there's some things happening in the committee that you think are of interest to share with the school board. I was thinking recently when Mary Grace Hansen was here with DCSDC and talking about what they were reading and pursuing throughout the year. Fritz, for example, as the school board liaison, could really throughout the course of our school year really in intervals kind of say, well, here's what that particular committee is working on, rather than maybe waiting and hearing a yearly report. So it's something we'd like to open for discussion to board members if they think that could be of value. One suggestion was to maybe have just a short Google document that you could fill out that would keep the information concise and consistent. And again, you're choosing whether you feel like there's some things happening in your committee that would be of interest to board members. So thoughts, suggestions?
I think it sounds great.
No?
Seems like a good idea. Would it be included in the packet, or would it be a moment for presentation?
We would time it to where it would be included in the packet, so that you'd have an opportunity then to ask that particular board member questions. And really, because a lot of these committees meet not necessarily, many of them just meet monthly and some meet as needed, so there wouldn't be necessarily reports from those, but maybe we do it just once a month to begin with, and that board members would have an opportunity to say, oh, you know what, I want to report something, and we can start it and see how we go with it, if the board is interested. Okay. And Matt, I think we decided that it would come after announcements and recognitions in terms of
I
the
think that we
agenda.
looked at saying that we'd put it, just right after the announcements and recognitions, but just before the discussion and other reports. And so I think just the couple of questions to really bring full circle, just from a straw poll perspective, is do we want to integrate it monthly or at each meeting? So either once a month or at each meeting. I agree. I think starting it at once a month, that gives us a chance to see how that goes. I think the other piece just to verify is that, we have two different pieces on the district committee sheet. There's the district committees, and then there are representatives to organization and governing bodies. So some of you are assigned to a particular committee that isn't within the school, but it's more of a community committee. My recommendation would be that we include both of those groups, so that, again, on an as-needed basis, if there is something from MSBA legislative liaison that Julie wants to update people, she has that ability. Or if the Torch Advisory Group meets, even though that's not technically a committee of the board, there is board representation there. And I think the filling out the Google form ahead of time will give board members a chance to see the report in the packet, and we won't then be pressured to make up the report on the spot at the board meeting, which probably isn't good for any of us, even though many of you are great extemporaneous speakers, but I think we'd all prefer to have a few notes ahead of us. So I guess I'm hearing people saying once a month. Is there a preference for which meeting, the first or the second?
I would prefer the second.
The second meeting?
Do you want to start it at the second meeting in September or October?
I think starting it in September would be all right, because there may be some, I know, for example, Rob has got a meeting of the Human Rights Commission that's coming up. Maybe he wants to offer something on that. So I think, again, it may be times where we don't have anything, and that's okay. So I think starting in September would be fine if people are amenable to that.
Yes, and I think I agree with the second meeting of the month, because I know DPAC is the third Monday of the month, and
Does that
Oh,
catch
Fine
more
arts
meetings?
boosters.
yes, Fine Arts Boosters, District Youth Council. So I think just from a timing standpoint, that second meeting of the month seems like the one. Again, we can always adjust. Okay.
All right, we will move forward.
Excellent.
Thank you.
A nice addition to our meetings. So thanks, Rob, for that excellent suggestion. Okay, so now we will move on to items for individual action. Our first item is School Board Policy 527, student use and parking of motor vehicles, patrols, inspections, and searches. Dr. Hillman?
Sure. So after reviewing the recording from the June 13th school board meeting, we discovered that we had a really robust discussion about Policy 527. It was an excellent discussion. We had an initial motion and a second to approve the motion. Then there was an amendment, which was it was moved and it was seconded and it was passed. And then I think just the significance of the discussion when we came back to actually think about doing the final vote on the original motion, it was inadvertently skipped over and we went on to the next agenda item. And so we just did not officially take a formal vote on that initial motion. And while we actually have some opinions thinking that we probably would have been okay, we have just really thought that it was the best piece to bring back that complete policy after the discussion. The copy that you have in your file has the updated language, which included the amendment that Noel had made. And so just to make sure that we have it appropriately done, we're asking that you move to approve the policy. We would ask for a motion and a second, and then we would try to pass it again here this evening.
Okay, so because this is an item for individual action prior to discussion or questions, is there a motion to approve School Board Policy 527, student use of parking of motor vehicles, patrols, inspections, and searches as amended? Moved by Noel, second? Second by Fritz. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next item for individual action is a resolution regarding Christopher Columbus Day. Dr. Hillman.
So as you know, Christopher Columbus Day is a federal holiday, but Minnesota statute allows local jurisdictions to designate it as a day where public business can be conducted. This is we have done this motion and done this for many, many years. And so we have a school board meeting scheduled for October 10th, which is Christopher Columbus Day. So what we're asking is that you allow us to conduct business on that day for the purposes of the school board meeting.
Okay, again, as an item for individual action, is there a motion to approve the resolution regarding Christopher Columbus Day? Moved by Margaret, second? Second by Rob. This is a resolution, so it requires a roll call vote.
Could you please read the resolution?
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. The resolution reads as follows. Whereas Minnesota Statute Section 645.44 Subdivision 5 and Minnesota Statutes 120A.42 gives the district an option of determining whether Christopher Columbus Day shall be a holiday, then be it resolved that Christopher Columbus Day on October 10, 2016 shall not be a holiday.
Bogart?
Yes.
Hardy?
Aye.
Colangelo?
Aye.
Cornell?
Aye.
Stratton?
Aye.
Pritchett?
Aye. Okay. Our next item for individual action is the fiscal year 2016 audit engagement letter.
So the audit engagement letter from Clifton Larson Allen that you have, again, is an annual piece that we do to really kick off the audit. It's gives the parameters of what the auditing company will be looking at and those kinds of things. And so again, this is what we're asking you to do, is to approve us starting that audit process with Clifton Larson Allen as presented in your budget packet.
Okay. Is there a motion to accept the 2015-16 engagement letter from Clifton Larson Allen? Moved by Margaret, second. Second by Fritz. Is there any discussion or questions regarding the audit? None? Okay. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We will move then to the other additional item for individual action, the position modifications for directors of finance and human resources. Dr. Hillman.
At the June 13th board meeting, I outlined a plan that I was bringing to you to not fulfill the position that I formerly held of the Director of Administrative Services. As part of that, I also asked, and we approved that evening, some small changes to the Technology Services Department, of which we have now hired both of those folks, and both coming with some significant school district experience from elsewhere, so thank you for that. And then the second portion of that was to do some position modifications, some salary modifications for our Director of Human Resources and our Director of Finance. If you recall, the total salary modification between the two was $32,237. We will still see a $127,000 savings to the district, which we are asking that you allow us to hold within the administrative budget to offset likely budget reductions that will happen in the 2017-18 school year. I would just like to remind you too that I had shared the last time that even with these modifications in both duties and in the salary, recognizing that greater authority and autonomy in their positions, these two positions will still be paid at the lowest level in the Big Nine. And prior to this salary recommendation change, those two positions were roughly 20% below the median, or below the mean of their likely or similarly situated counterparts in the rest of the Big Nine. This would get them roughly about 6% lower than the mean, but still in the 8th or 9th slot overall. So I just think it's a key piece that we recognize the work that these folks are going to take on and do, yet still maintaining about $127,000 worth of savings to the budget that we will withhold and move forward for next year.
Okay. Again, this is an item for individual action. Is there a motion to approve the recommended changes to the Directors of Human Resources and Finance positions at a total cost of $32,237 and holding the $127,000 in savings from the reduction of the Director of Administrative Services position within the district administrative budget? Moved by Fritz. Is there a second? Second by Margaret. Questions or comments board members have? Okay. I just wanted to comment that I think, I think it's just really good management practice that we have really two very highly experienced and very capable individuals in these positions, and it really makes good sense to give them additional responsibilities, and the cost savings is something that is really going to be essential as we move forward. So I think the recommendation is a really excellent one. The question I have, are these cabinet level positions?
They will not be part of what is currently considered the cabinet level contract or master or agreement. However, we are going to be doing our leadership team slightly differently moving forward, and so they will be involved in the twice a month all administrative leadership team meetings that we'll be having.
Okay, excellent. So are there any final questions or comments before we vote on the motion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. The next item for individual action is the additional middle school sidewalk. Dr. Hillman, and a reminder in our table file was a sketch of the actual sidewalk addition.
So I'm going to ask Jim Culseth, our Buildings and Grounds Director, if you can come to the podium here as well to help me through this. At the last meeting, Margaret, you asked a great question, asking if the sidewalk on the north side of the driveway would extend all the way to the end. And going back the next day talking with Jim and Greg, we discovered that it was not scheduled to go all the way to the end, and we had a discussion about the purpose of it, and the reason for that was a logical one. However, at the end of the day, we've determined that we do believe that we need to have that sidewalk extend the entire length of the north side of the driveway. Jim, would you just give a little bit of an overview of this process here, please?
Well, as Dr. Hillman has said, originally the sidewalk was going about 2/3 of the way down, and working with Greg on this, the intent with that was to go past a crosswalk and limit the drop-off pickup zone to further up closer to the building and not have the dropping off and picking up go all the way down close to the road. Greg was thinking keep it limited up to the building, closer to the building. But in looking at things and talking with enough people and getting some feedback, it was agreed that the proper thing to do was to just replace it, widen the driveway, and replace the sidewalk as it currently is. That would allow dropping off and picking up just almost all the way down to the end of the drive as it currently is, just past the current tar path that runs north and south along Highway 246.
And this is a change order, because as you know, you approved the middle school driveway project at our last meeting, so it would be a change order of $16,740. This is part of what we've also worked with the city recently too. The city was very interested in us having this sidewalk extend all the way past the tar path, as Jim has said. And so what we're asking is for you to approve this change order for $16,740 to the middle school driveway project.
Is there a motion to approve the change order in the amount of $16,740 for the middle school driveway project, allowing for sidewalks to be installed on the entirety of both the north and south sides of the driveway?
So moved.
Moved by Rob, second? Second by Noel. So are there any questions for either Dr. Hillman or Jim? Margaret?
I noticed, after school, especially when there's activities, people are parking on the highway. I'm looking at the map from the north. They're parking on the highway where they shouldn't. Is there a concern that people will then park here for all the soccer games that happen in there and so on? Yes?
They already do.
And that's okay after school hours, or?
It's not real safe. It makes it tough. It would help with the wide entry. The hope is that if they park there with the wide entry, there's enough room for two sets of traffic.
We can still get two-way traffic over here. Okay.
It will make it better than what it is now.
Right.
Because right now they're parking there with 2 lanes of traffic.
Right.
And there will at least be that 3rd lane that is intended really for that pull-off.
Right. Okay.
We can mark that as strictly a drop-off, not a parking area, and whether it's observed or not, that will.
Well, it's either
yet to
there
be
or on the
seen.
highway, and I guess they're both just
Well,
really bad.
exactly.
But I'm glad we did this, because I'm thinking of the kids coming on that path from the north. We sure didn't want them crossing that opening.
Yes.
We would have created a whole new problem.
Yep.
Okay,
It's a
thank you.
good, safe option.
Thank you, thank you.
Other questions for Jim? Rob?
On this doesn't have to do with the change order, but I'm just wondering about the south side sidewalk. It shows it going up to the crosswalk across the driveway, but there's going to be a crosswalk across 246 too. Does it continue to? It doesn't look like it continues there to the actual road.
I think you're talking about, Rob, where the current, that red crosswalk is right here.
It doesn't seem to be
Yeah,
any down there.
and that's because this is the current drawing right now, and it will. This is the current drawing of the pieces that the school district is responsible for.
Okay.
There is another drawing that the city approved
Okay.
that would show that piece, because exactly on the south side, there's some work that needs to be done, some fill work there to be able to have that exit out of there to be able to cross onto the crosswalk across 246. Am I saying that right, Jim?
Yeah, you're referring to connecting the tar path basically with the crosswalk at our drive entry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what the city will be doing then is adding the crosswalk at Arbor that will cross 246, and that crosswalk will connect to our new sidewalk that will be on the south side of the driveway.
This is the drawing. The city actually did this drawing for us. It's very nice, but it's
Yes.
only the pieces that we were responsible for as the school.
Yeah, the city project was actually just, you may or may not know, was just approved last week. So I know that they're working furiously at getting their drawings, and they're working their production stuff moving ahead so that they can get this wrapped up before the start of school.
Okay. Other questions? I have a question on when you think the work will begin on the middle school driveway.
Today.
Oh, excellent.
Yep,
I have
it's-
not been by. That's
Yes.
really exciting.
Well, if you think about, if you would talk to Dr. Richardson, he would say this is something he had been trying to work on probably since he arrived here, and I'm going to guess even before that, previous superintendents and directors of buildings and grounds. And so we're really pleased to have an option for students to cross 246 in a safe manner. Remember, we are going to staff that 240, we're going to staff both crosswalks, the 246 crosswalk and the crosswalk that we pointed out that's up closer to the school before school begins and at the end of the school day to ensure safe passage. So this is a commitment both by the city and the school district to really try to make some significant modifications to help students be able to walk to school or bike to school in a safe manner.
Maybe we should name it after
I'm not sure he would like that, so.
I think I actually recall in our thought exchange when we did a total district, there was lots of comments from parents about the middle school driveway, so I think that, as I said, the collective cheer heard around the world when they have suddenly come back in August and September and see that it's widened. So thanks, Jim, for your work. I know it's been a ton of back and forth, particularly with trying to have to collaborate with the city on this piece, so thank you very much.
It's moving ahead very nicely.
Good, excellent. Okay, so is there any other questions or comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second. So all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you again, Jim. Okay, move on then to our last item for individual action, which is the long-term facilities maintenance revenue and 10-year plan, which was included in the packet. And then in the table file was just an interesting article from MSBA, just talking about sort of the nuts and bolts of the long-term facilities maintenance revenue. Val has done an excellent job, as did Dr. Richardson, when this whole piece came together, but it's just something that they've reiterated in one of their recent journal articles that kind of explain it a little more in depth. So, Dr. Hillman.
So in your packet, I gave you a copy of what we had provided you last year, because last year was the first year of the long-term facilities maintenance revenue program. And again, it wasn't an entirely new program, but you remember that only 25 of the largest districts in the state used to have access to similar funding. It was called the alternative facilities bonding process. And the legislature, under the leadership of Senator Kevin Dahl, created the long-term facilities maintenance revenue program during the 2015 session. It's really going to give us some significant increase in dollars to be able to address facilities issues as it's phased in over the next several years. A key thing is the fact that it's taking some of the money from the old health and safety, some money from the old deferred maintenance revenue program, and it's putting it together, and then it also added additional money. It also did some equalization for it because it's a mix of aid and levy, which is very good because that's a good piece for our taxpayers. But part of what we need to do each year to access the revenue is we need to approve a 10-year plan. We have had a 10-year plan for a long time, well before it was required by this program. And so the department gives us a template that Val and Jim have worked on together. And basically we know that everything that's on that template is not going to be able to be funded by this year's long-term facilities maintenance revenue. Some of it might be able to be funded by our local operating capital revenue or our capital projects revenue. But there's some specific things that we are only able to do with the long-term facilities maintenance revenue. There's some limitations on it. So in your packet, you have some pieces around UFARS codes in terms of some very basic crossing here. I'm not going to go through them all because we did talk about them last year. But so, for example, in the physical hazards UFARS finance code, things that would be eligible for long-term facilities maintenance revenue expenditures would be elevator and lift inspections. Those have to be inspected on a regular basis. We can use the long-term facilities maintenance revenue to pay for something like that. When you look at something like accessibility, you could do, we had several years ago, we did a ramp into the auxiliary gym at the high school. That's the kind of piece that would be eligible. You would also look at interior services like carpeting. Really, if you think about it, long-term facilities maintenance revenue allows you to replace or keep in as good condition as possible things that you already have. So when the space is updated, it has to serve a similar purpose to what it did before. So it's difficult to do new construction, but you can modify or do things that make your facility last a longer amount of time. So that is really what the 10-year plan does. There's not a significant amount of change from the plan from last year, but it is a template. The board is required to approve it for MD by August 1st of every year. Last year we had a little bit of an extension because it was the first year of the program. But what we're asking for you this evening is to approve this so that we're able to be eligible for the dollars. And I'll just ask if Val or Jim have any comments on it or if I've covered it acceptably.
You've covered it. I did just want to add a point for information. We are looking at doing a possible bond with the long-term facility maintenance. And that's not included in the materials because we've just started that conversation. In the past, we have typically done a capital facility bond where it's a reduction of our capital revenue. Since we'll have significantly more long-term facility maintenance revenue, it's a smarter decision to use that funding instead. So we're working with Ellers on what that might look like and timing wise.
And that's the Bridgewater roof, if I'm
The
remembering
Bridgewater roof,
correctly.
yep. It is on the 10-year plan. The dollar amount is, it's about $1.3 million. We have not, obviously, this was our first year, so we're not gonna have that much in our fund balance, so we would like to, at least look at that. It's something that's, we know is upcoming, so just wanted to let you know, and if that is the case, we will come back with a revised 10-year plan, because there's some things that we have to do for the state to get approval for that, so.
Okay. All right, so is there a motion to approve the long-term facilities maintenance revenue and 10-year plan? Moved by Margaret, is there a second? Second by Noel. So are there questions or comments? Rob?
This is just a technical question. On this sheet that the second sheet on this in the packet,
The spreadsheet looking
spreadsheet,
template.
yeah. There are 3 items, the asbestos, fire safety, and indoor air quality, that are on there twice, and one there's numbers, and then there's just a bunch of zeros, and the second time they appear. Why is that?
Yeah, so part of the long-term facility maintenance funding is there's additional revenue and equalization available for projects over 100,000. So, but it's only for those 3 specific categories. We do not currently have any projects in those categories that would cost more than 100,000. That's why that part of that category is 0. But the other ones have amounts in them.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
Other questions or comments? I think, as we said in 2015, it's sort of an example where our legislators got it right, which is really refreshing. And I think if you look at the MSBA article, which actually was written in conjunction with Associate at Ellers, there's an example of how the Monticello School District has used it really effectively. So I think we're fortunate.
Actually, in a similar way to what Val is talking about with the roof.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so any other questions or comments? None? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That takes care of our items for individual action, so we can move on to items for the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping? I don't want to pull anything from the consent grouping, but I just wanted to make note of the Northfield Booster Club and their extremely generous donation of $13,000 for equipment across a number of different teams, and $13,000 to cover athletic fee waivers for athletes who need financial support. So that's huge. We thank the Northfield Booster Club, but we also thank the community who choose to be Booster Club supporters and show up and buy hot dogs and popcorn and pizza and support any sort of other Booster Club activities. So it all comes together in a significant amount of money, and we're sincerely grateful for that. So, so is there a motion to approve the consent grouping?
So.
Moved by Fritz. Is there a second? Second by Jeff. Okay. All those in favor of approving
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was waiting. I'm not sure what huddle means. HUD, I'm sure it's an acronym,
Yeah,
but.
Huddle is actually a piece of software. It's a video software that they use. So really what it allows is it allows coaches to break down film in a way. So it's a piece that I believe is used
Okay.
across, but the Huddle software is something that is, it's a video-based kind of
Okay.
situation.
Okay, that's all.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So we will move on to items for information. Our first item, Master Facilities Planning and Thought Exchange Results Release. Dr. Hillman.
So you have seen this before. As you know, our thought exchange process on facilities, focused on facilities, was completed this spring. If you remember, Jen Riley from Thought Exchange shared an overview of the data with you in May. And last week, the website was launched so our community can also discover what the data means. And what we will be doing is, it's been a long time, but we can now see the end of the tunnel on the long-term facilities planning process. And basically what will be happening in the next few months is our administrative team will be taking the data. It'll be used in conjunction with the feedback that we previously received with numerous face-to-face sessions in both 2014 and 15. We will complete a long-term master facilities plan document for your consideration that we'll bring before you this fall. And I want to remind people, you know, the long-term facilities plan does not immediately prompt any kind of bond referendum. It simply sets the priorities that we have for our facilities for a long-term process. It might be something that in the future it does prompt a bond referendum, but this by itself does not. It is really a guiding document for us of how we're going to handle our facilities, both our deferred maintenance and the life cycle of our facilities, as well as the educational adequacy of the buildings that serve our students. So really just wanted to remind you and let you know that that's out there in case people stop you on the street and say, hey, I saw this in that document, which you have already had a chance to see. And you as a board can then determine when the conditions permit for us to take action and go to the community for some of those kinds of priorities that we have identified. So that is just a very brief update for you so that you know that the data is on the street, so to speak.
So are there questions or comments? I had a question. So what happens next is ATS&R then comes and looks at collectively the results, and then they come back with, here's the
finalized plan,
culmination.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, it's not, a finalized plan does not commit us to anything. It doesn't say that we're gonna do this in 2018 or 2020 or 2021. You know, we don't have, in some districts, their master facilities plan might be triggered by an enrollment number. So for example, in a district that's growing significantly, their plan might say when we hit 1,900 students at this high school, we're going to consider doing this. We don't have that kind of enrollment issue. Ours will be more based upon the life cycle of that facility. So we will be finalizing the plan, bringing it back to you for a formal approval, and then we will be looking at that on a yearly basis. We'll put it on an agenda on a yearly basis for us to take a look at and say, are the conditions right now for us to look at our first priority on the plan?
Do you have any idea the timing of when ATS&R would be completing that work?
I am believing we should have it by the end of October.
Okay.
Hopefully sooner, but if I say the end of October, I think we're safe.
Okay, excellent. That's exciting. It's been a great process. Okay, any other questions on master facilities? So then we will move on to new and exciting piece called the superintendent's blog.
So as I started the superintendency here on July 1st, one of the things that we all know is really important is communication with all of the stakeholders, both externally and internally in the community. And so we want to try to find ways that we can reach out to people in an ongoing way. And one way we're going to try is through the superintendent's blog. So I started this, it's called the #NFLD lead blog, so that we can also tweet it out and people can find all of the posts in a nice Twitter-friendly fashion. We've got a couple of posts on it so far. Wrote just one about our appreciation for Dr. Richardson and the challenges that we face moving forward as a new superintendent. And then also posted one last Friday just about the master facilities or the thought exchange data being released. My goal is to publish something about once a week, and it'll range from, it could be a couple of paragraphs to something where it could be taking on a larger issue that maybe came up in our thought exchange process, trying to help educate the public about, like you saw tonight with the scheduling presentation. That really would open a lot of people's eyes about the complexity of how you actually get that final schedule. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to be looking at with the blog, and then we're going to try to, of course, to reuse any of the content that we can. So if there's a piece that would make sense to say submit it to the Northfield News to be printed, we could do that. We might reuse some of it in our staff newsletter or those kinds of things. So just another way for us to communicate with the community. It's not a true blog in terms of having comments at this point. It's really more of an online newsletter if you think of it that way.
Questions board members have? So as I was on the district website and I saw superintendent's blog, I was like, oh, this is cool. So if you hit, as board members, if you want to go on and it's on the front page of the district website, and then you can put in your information and we can all be, I'm now officially part of the blog, so I will.
You can get it emailed to you, yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't email it to you immediately. I find it takes about 12 hours for the system to kick in and do that, but.
So are you anticipating that will always be on the front page, the front of the page, or will it get moved?
It will always be on the home page. Where it is, it may end up in the quick links at the bottom.
Okay.
But we have it in a couple of different places in the website. So to begin with, we'll keep it there until something else is more important for that button.
Okay. And then how will you communicate this to families? Is it just function of them happening to see it, or is there going to be sort of much more intention to
Well, when families start, the nice part about starting this in July is that I can get it started and get a routine down on that kind of piece. But My sense would be that what we will do is we will communicate it through the buildings, through their newsletters and their back-to-school kinds of pieces. We could also do, I plan to do a few more district-wide Skylar. We're not gonna flood people's email boxes, but from time to time, the district office may send a Skylar to families. This would be the kind of thing that we would use at the beginning of the year to welcome them back and to say this is just another way that you can look for information about the school district.
Okay, excellent. Again, I just think that obviously it's just such a challenging issue to try to keep our community apprised of what's happening. So I think this is an excellent idea. Great communication piece. Good deal. Okay. So our last item for information is the filing for school board. We had discussed that as well in our June 13th board meeting. So we know now that the filing dates begin on Tuesday, August 2nd, 2016, and close on Tuesday, August 16th, 2016. So August 2nd date is quickly approaching for those on the board who need to be concerned with that.
And I think it's important to note that the filing window is from 8 to 4:30 each day in the district office. Folks would see Danita Delzer to do, or Val, one of the two, to be able to do it. And then in addition, on that last day, the 16th, we actually will stay open until 5 o'clock to accept those. And then I believe people actually have till the 18th of August to change their mind. So if you file on the 16th and then on the 17th you determine that's not something you want to do, you can actually recant up until the 18th.
We have 4 seats available. Logan, Hardy, Iverson, and Strathmore.
Okay, any questions on that? So then, that really, I believe, takes care of all of our meeting items. Just a reminder of future board meetings, Monday, August 8th, as we discuss now. We'll hope that all board members will be available to convene that evening at 5 p.m. with a regular board meeting at 7 p.m. And then the following meeting in August is Monday, August 22nd at 7 p.m. And at that point, we will be back in the media center for both of the August meetings. So, Dr. Hillman, you have completed your first board meeting. Well done.
Thank you.
And it's the first of many firsts, I know, so it's all exciting and it's all good. So, if there's any other comments? All right, so we ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Noel. Second? Second by Jeff. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.